This presentation is intended to give interested folks an idea of the city of Elko New Market's water system, the different components of it, and the history, and what's going on and what's coming up in the future. It gives a system description, brief history, the water appropriation permit, which is mentioned in other presentations. Let's give a little more information on that. Recent pumping volumes, the permit conditions that we have for our current permit and where we're at in completing those, a little bit information about the history of the quality of the raw water, and then some information on capital improvement planning going forward. So to help you understand how the city's system works, at least conceptually, this figure was put together. You'll recognize from other presentations the aquifer down below, the Prairie du Chien on top of the Jordan sandstone. In green, we've got a city well that's shown down through the Prairie du Chien down into the sandstone, just to have a more exposure to water in the aquifer. To get greater volumes. The city well is typically a 14-inch casing with an 8-inch drop pipe and a submersible pump down well below that static water level due to the higher drawdowns at higher pumping rates. The well pumps up, the green represents raw water, meaning it hasn't been treated yet. So it would be the same as the water coming into your systems. Goes into the water treatment plant where it is oxidized to help remove iron and manganese. It helps convert that dissolved iron and manganese into a particle that can be filtered. There's extensive filtration beds that remove those particles. Then the water is disinfected and stored and pumped. There's a reservoir under the treatment plant that can store almost 500,000 gallons of water. That's all finished water. And there's high service pumps in the plant that push that water out in this blue line. The blue represents finished water. You'll recognize this break, since this is drawn to scale except horizontally. Put that break in there to represent a gap. Goes into the distribution system, where whatever isn't pushed into homes because they can't use it all, the excess, which is most of it, will go up and fill the tower. The water tower stores finished water for emergencies, but just like your pressure tank, it maintains pressure to all the taps that are connected to the city's water system when the service pumps are off. And just like your air tank, the water tower will refill and empty based on demand and the pumps. So when the water tower gets low, a signal is sent to the pumps at the plant to turn on. They turn on, fill the tower back up, signal sent back, okay, I'm full, turn the water off, turns the water off, and the cycle repeats itself. Of course, customers are obvious. You'll see the blue line represents the distribution piping throughout the city. That comes in different sizes based on the amount of water it needs to carry to any given area. And then there's a small 1-inch, typically copper or plastic service line from that distribution main out in the street into the home where it's used by the customers. Some people might find it interesting to know the city installed its first wells, towers, and pipes back in the 1940s. At that time, the cities of Elko and New Market were, of course, separate, so each had their own distribution pipes, their own well, and a water tower. I've never seen it, but I'm told that Elko New Market had sort of the old-fashioned tower that you might see in some other smaller towns still out there, a tank with sort of a witch's hat lid on it. And my understanding was that Elko had a standpipe, which is just a bigger pipe straight up and down, not a typical water tower, but common in small communities. The first sanitary sewer collection system went into both cities under a shared agreement back in the 1980s. And that was, of course, to collect wastewater from the homes, deliver them to a treatment plant, set of ponds the city had north of town. Those ponds have now been abandoned, and the city sends its wastewater to the Met Council for treatment. That's not pertinent to this discussion, but gives you an idea of the history of development. In the 90s, the cities started to see some rapid growth, and more wells, more pipes, and new towers were put in each community to store more finished water. At that time, there was no treatment other than some disinfection at the well itself. So they were storing water very similar to what people in the township are using today. The cities merged in 2007. Elko and New Market became Elko New Market. The water systems between the two formerly separate communities were interconnected in 2012 so that an emergency water could be sent from one to the other. The filtration plant that I described earlier was added in 2015, went online around the end of 2015, early 2016. And that's when the cities began removing iron and manganese so that they could have nicer water. It also removed radium, which was a health concern, along with that iron and manganese removal. And then the city's last update to its water appropriation permit, which I believe it's had since 1984, when it was first required. The city updated that in 2024 to increase the amount of water they could use every year out of the aquifer. A water appropriation permit is a permit issued by the DNR to anybody that's using over 10,000 gallons per day or 1 million gallons per year. That would include someone that has a farm and wants to do irrigation. It's even required if someone's going to do dewatering for a construction project if they're going to be pumping over 10,000 gallons a day, even though that might be a short-lived permit. So they apply to everybody that's using these amounts of water. Elko New Market's permit number is listed here. Our current annual limit is 365 million gallons per year. That averages to 1 million gallons a day, although we could use 3 million gallons a day, but then other days would have to be less in order to not exceed that maximum. The aquifer pump test mentioned in other presentations was required prior to the issuance of this larger withdrawal amount in the 2024 permit. That permit issuance also had a condition that we had to complete a well interference response plan and a water quality complaints response plan. The well interference response plan had to do with helping the DNR get information so they could assess whether wells in the area were at risk of interference, which is explained in a separate video, but basically checking whether city pumping might cause wells in the area to not have access to water in the aquifer because of drawdown. We are aware of 3 interference claims. One was determined to be unfounded. It was found to be that well was a shallow well in a different aquifer, not connected to city pumping. Another one looks like it is valid, and we're in the middle of settling that claim. And another one, we're still intaking data to assess whether that was an interference issue or something else. We have issued or offered well agreements as required by the DNR to any wells they thought might be at risk of interference. We've notified people within 2.5 miles of the city of this potential issue. We do have some minor resubmittals the DNR has requested of the data that we gathered, corrections or oversights to get that finished up. And as I mentioned, 2 interference claims still being worked on. The Water Quality Complaints Response Plan is a different plan from the interference plan. That is focused on how city pumping may affect or did affect water quality of wells in the area. Notifications were sent to over 900 well owners within 2.5 miles of the city. That included known wells or sites with buildings on it that might have a well. A public information meeting was held. We advised folks what to do if they had water quality issues that were believed to be related to city pumping. And we advised people of complaints related to the aquifer pump test that we'd already received and provided information how to submit a claim beyond that. That response plan did require the notifications, but also requires 3 rounds of sampling from wells in the area. We have completed 1 round of that and are preparing for rounds 2 and 3 later in 2025. So more detail on that. The second round of sampling is required by the plan to be triggered when the city pumps 1 million gallons a day for 14 days or more. We did not hit that in 2025. And so we are scheduling that level of pumping for later in October of this year. By scheduling it, we can better notify folks ahead of time, line up our sampling sites and the sampling technicians, and do that in a more controlled fashion. If we waited for that level of pumping to be reached incidentally, we'd have to scramble once we knew we had 14 days to let people know that we're coming out to sample and lining up the crews. We decided that a controlled approach would be more helpful to people involved. Round 3 sampling after round 2 is triggered by return of city pumping levels to winter pumping levels, and we expect that to happen in November of 2025. Pretty typical that our pumping levels drop in late fall and stay low through the winter. The purpose of this sampling is intended to determine whether pumping volumes by the city affect water quality parameters in the aquifer water outside of the city or even in the city. So these 3 rounds is kind of before higher pumping, then during higher pumping, then after higher pumping, and they'll be comparing the concentrations of the constituents sampled for those 3 things. It's the same sampling for each round, same constituents and same locations. By the way, those locations have already been determined, so we're not seeking new sampling sites. I know a lot of folks were interested in being one of those, but that is now set. We know there's interest in what the city has been doing for pumping. This chart shows in the orange color the daily average pumping by month from January 2023 through August of 2025. So immediately it'll jump out at you that pumping in the summer, especially a dry summer like 2023, goes way up, over double what our winter pumping is. A wet year or wetter year like 2024 has lower summer pumping, but still notably higher than the pumping during the winter months. Just a couple of points on this. If anybody's really looking at this closely, you would expect in November and December of 2023, when we did the aquifer pump test, those months would be way up. And the data shows they are. I corrected for that so they get a better idea of the typical winter, spring, fall pumping pattern. And then the other thing you might be interested to know, Niagara started operations in April of 25, and this shows pumping influence of not only their use, but the city's typical increase in summer use. and it's tailing off even as of August, and we expect that will continue down to lower levels into the winter months. Since it relates to the water appropriation permit, just a little bit more about the water quality complaints that were received during the aquifer pump test in 2023. We got about 70 complaints reporting late 2023 as the date of the incident. That complaint intake is now closed. The city investigated the cause of those complaints on its own accord. It wasn't a requirement in the water quality response plan. That was focused on notifications and sampling. However, City Council did want to try and find out what happened because it was unexpected by the city, by the DNR, and by, of course, the residents affected. And they wanted to know more about it to see if it was a health concern, if it could be prevented in the future, what caused it, if any compensation would be appropriate, and that has all been resolved. The complaints that were received, the city's in the process of working out whatever compensation is appropriate, and that'll go forward until close. But new complaints are now closed since the city did do a pretty extensive notification to make sure people within 2.5 miles of the city knew about that issue and what to do if they also experienced that problem. Bottom line, we found that drawdown during the pump test facilitated release of built-up material in the private well casings, and that release of that material was higher than they'd normally see. I mean, it's always happening a little bit, but this caused it to come off in more of a slug, and that followed some treatment equipment in some homes. We know that the Department of Health is interested in whether city pumping has an impact on water quality constituents. That's one of the reasons for the requirements in the water quality response plan. We're also picking up that residents are concerned about whether city pumping is changing the water in some fashion. Of course, the city's not adding anything to the aquifer, but it is withdrawing, and it will be withdrawing more as the city grows. What I have here is the raw water samples for iron, which is Fe, and manganese, which is Mn, taken at one of the city's wells since 2016. They don't routinely sample raw water for these constituents, but occasionally they do, just to see if things are changing or they need to make any adjustments to the treatment processes. So the rust-colored dots would be iron coming in to the city's water treatment plant from 2016 through kind of the middle of 2024. You can see that they're holding steady. They tend to cluster around that 900 micrograms per liter, some as low as 8, some sometimes above. They do jump around. You might notice an interesting spike if you could zoom in on the dates, which I did. That coincides with the beginning of the pandemic. And I did not look into this, but my hunch is that that spike might have more to do with the sampling or the sampler at that time because of the way we had to work during the pandemic than the actual constituent level. It's very unlikely that it would, jump by a factor of 20-30% for a short time and then come back down and hover around that historical 900 micrograms. But that's the data for one well for iron. The lower numbers, the blue dots, that's manganese, which tends to be roughly 1/10 of the concentration of iron, at least in terms of concentration. In terms of nuisance, as many of you know, manganese can be a pain in the neck. It turns black and gunky and is objectionable in the water. These show a pretty consistent concentration, somewhere in that 100 to 200, 150 micrograms per liter range, which is above the health standard of 100 micrograms per liter. However, keep in mind, both of these are untreated water. This is water coming out of the aquifer into the treatment plant. It goes out to our customers at levels that are below health standards. I think the main point of this is just to show that we have not seen, despite growth in the city since 2016 through 2024, any trend that shows increasing concentration levels. It certainly jumps around, but there's not an apparent upward trend. So a little overview on what's coming next for the city's capital improvements. Basically, the infrastructure the city needs to continue to serve its customers as the city grows. This chart shows the average day pumping. And again, keep in mind, average day means some days can be more, some days can be less. But for a given time period, this is the average. We're sitting now in 2025 at around 700,000 gallons a day. You see a sharp increase. We expect, and this would be primarily Niagara's phase 2. We don't know when that would come online. It could be as early as shown here, maybe in 27 or 28. It could very well be later. What that just means is that first steep slope in this chart right here would get flatter and move out. But at some point, given the infrastructure and the planning for that site and for city's growth, remember this is not all Niagara, the city will continue to grow and that population drives more usage. So this goes out to 2045 where we, at least right now, are projecting to be somewhere in that 1.6 1.7 million gallons a day of pumping versus the current average of around 700 when you consider winter and summer. It wasn't mentioned in the last slide, but the city does not design its facilities for average day because it has to serve customers even on the hottest, driest day when everybody's watering. And so we design our system for the peak day. And that is, I didn't show a chart for that, but that has higher flows. So to meet those peak day demands, we are planning another firm capacity well in 2026. What firm capacity is that the city has to be able to supply its peak day demand with its largest well out of service. So a firm capacity well is essentially a backup well for that largest well in case there's a lightning strike or something happens to it that we can't use it. So the purpose of that well in 2026 is to make sure that we can meet demands even if a well is down. We are also looking at increasing our potential production in 2026. That may be through blending some untreated or unfiltered anyway. It will still receive partial treatment. Unfiltered water in with our filtered water. We're treating to well below standards, so we could mix in some unfiltered water and still meet those standards, but boost our production by 20% for pretty low cost. So we're looking at that. It may mean some other sort of smaller partial treatment that we could use to boost capacity. That hasn't been decided yet, but we are looking at that potential increase in production in 2026. We're looking at an elevated storage improvement in 2027. That is related to firefighting. We look at storage in two ways. One is just it needs to kind of average our average daily demand, the amount of storage we have on hand. But we also have to be able to fight a fire at a flow for a commercial area, which of course we have the industrial park, but we also have other commercial areas at those rates for 2 hours while we're continuing to serve other customers. So that means we have to be able to fight that fire on, again, that hottest day of the year when everybody's watering. And to do that, we need to have enough water in the air so we don't have to rely on our plant to push out that much water. And then finally, we're looking at increasing our supply and treatment capacity. Supply means another well, and treatment means probably a treatment plant expansion or a second treatment plant. And the numbers are showing that would be needed sometime around 2032. Treatment plant is a significant investment, so we hope to delay that by doing the production increase in 26. But we'll have to see how things actually shake out. We only work on projections based on Met Council population projections and historical usage. And if the future conditions are different than those assumptions, we have to adjust accordingly. And of course, if you've watched the other videos, you know by now I can't answer questions in this format, but we are hosting an open house, and you are invited, have been invited to that. If you have questions, you can come and ask them in person. Thanks for your attention.